Passenger vessels navigating Europe's most treacherous waters face unprecedented maritime dangers, especially when Mother Nature unleashes her fury. Right now, a crisis unfolds across the British Isles and Ireland. Storm Dave, a colossal low-pressure system spawned in the Atlantic, barrels toward the coast with terrifying force. What follows is catastrophic. Gale-force winds that tear at hull and rigging, torrential downpours reducing visibility to mere meters, and mountainous waves that dwarf even the largest vessels. The maritime authorities have issued grave warnings, no exceptions. Commercial shipping operations are on high alert, from the humble daily passenger ferries to the massive cruise liners that depend on these waters for survival. Every captain knows the truth. These routes demand respect. But understanding the true danger requires us to look back. History speaks in a language all mariners understand, the language of tragedy. February 2014, a moment that changed everything. The MS Marco Polo, a substantial cruise ship carrying hundreds of souls, encountered an enormous wave in the English Channel. One wave. That single collision with the sea's raw power left no doubt. Size and modern technology offer no guarantee of safety. The ocean, it seems, reserves judgment for no vessel, no matter how mighty, no matter how well equipped. On January 5, 2014, the MS Marco Polo departed Tilbury, England. Built in 1965 as the Soviet ocean liner Alexander Pushkin, this 22,000-ton vessel was beloved by experienced cruisers seeking authentic adventure. On board were 735 passengers, mostly British and affluent, and 349 crew members. The 42-night Amazon, West Indies, and Azores expedition represented the pinnacle of expedition cruising. From Tilbury, the ship would sail to Amsterdam, then south to Lisbon, Funchal, and Cape Verde Islands. After crossing the Atlantic, the Marco Polo would navigate into the Amazon River itself, then into the Caribbean, calling at Grenada, St. Lucia, and Barbados. Finally, the ship would return via the Azores before heading home. The voyage would cover approximately 12,000 nautical miles over 6 weeks. For most passengers, this was the trip of a lifetime, a chance to see wonders that few modern travelers ever experience. The voyage proceeded flawlessly. Captain Zhukov expertly managed the Atlantic crossing. This was his 4th Amazon run. Passengers settled into shipboard life, making friends and preparing for adventure. The Amazon proved magical. Pink river dolphins, indigenous villages, rainforest biodiversity. The Caribbean islands delivered steel bands, rum punch, and island culture. By early February, the voyage had exceeded all expectations. Everything suggested it would end triumphantly. On February 10th, the Marco Polo arrived at Horta in the Azores for a scheduled port call. As the ship prepared to depart, Captain Zhukov reviewed weather forecasts. The Atlantic was becoming restless, with forecasts indicating gale-force winds and rough seas in the southwestern approaches to the English Channel, precisely where the Marco Polo would be arriving in 4 days. Such conditions were not unusual for February. The Marco Polo had weathered far worse. With Tilbury less than 4 days away, there was every reason to expect a routine, if somewhat uncomfortable, final leg. The passengers, eager to return home after 6 weeks at sea, settled into the final sea days. The morning of February 14th dawned gray and turbulent. The Marco Polo was now in the southwestern approaches to the English Channel, that vital waterway where the Atlantic Ocean funnels into the narrow strait between England and France. The ship was merely hours from Tilbury, but the Atlantic, indifferent to human schedules and expectations, had other plans. Throughout the night and into the early morning, the low-pressure system had intensified with surprising ferocity. Gale-force winds, sustained at over 40 knots, battered the ship. The seas, driven by hours of wind fetch, had built into towering mountains of gray-green water, some exceeding 30 feet. The Marco Polo, riding these waves like a bucking horse, pitched and rolled constantly. Most passengers remain in their cabins, accustomed by now to rough seas. But some, particularly those comfortable with ship life, ventured to the public areas. On Deck 6, the elegant Waldorf Restaurant was serving lunch. The restaurant's large windows normally offered panoramic views of the sea. On this day, those same windows provided a direct connection between the ship's sheltered interior and the raw fury of the Atlantic. Inside the Waldorf, the scene was typical of rough-weather dining. Tables were partially occupied by hardy souls who had ventured out. Servers moved carefully through the aisles, their expertise allowing them to navigate the ship's constant motion. Passengers held onto tables, furniture shifted. The windows framed a landscape of churning, slate-gray water, punctuated by waves rising high enough to fill the entire frame. At precisely this moment, a rogue wave, an anomalous surge created by the interference of multiple wave systems, struck the starboard, right side of the ship with tremendous force. This was no gentle sloshing. This was millions of tons of ocean water impacting the vessel at a precise angle and location with kinetic force sufficient to shatter thick, tempered glass windows and force a torrent of seawater into the restaurant. One passenger described it with haunting simplicity. Suddenly, there was a very loud bang, and the daylight in the room reduced as a wall of seawater covered most of the starboard windows. The windows exploded inward. Cold Atlantic seawater, moving at tremendous velocity, flooded the Waldorf Restaurant in an instant. One diner reported, "All I remember was 1 minute I was sitting there, and the next, my head was underwater." Another passenger, Helen Swinstead, would later describe watching the window shatter and the sea engulf her table. "This window just came in and the sea with it. We were all very, very wet." Among those dining in the Waldorf Restaurant was James Swinstead, an 85-year-old British passenger. He was accompanied by his wife Helen, with whom he had been married for decades. They had looked forward to this cruise as a highlight of their retirement years, an adventure together before the final chapter of life. When the wave struck, James was killed almost instantly by the impact. He died, as Helen would later say, before they could get him on the helicopter. Helen survived the same impact that claimed her husband's life. A woman in her 70s was also critically injured. The ship's crew, responding with practiced professionalism, immediately initiated emergency procedures. A helicopter was dispatched from the mainland. Despite rough sea conditions and the challenges of hovering over a pitching ship in gale-force winds, the crew successfully airlifted the critically injured woman to medical care ashore. She survived and recovered. But James Swinstead did not. The man who had boarded the Marco Polo 6 weeks earlier, excited for adventure and new experiences with his beloved wife, would not return to Tilbury alive. In total, 16 people sustained injuries. 4 windows were shattered. The Waldorf Restaurant was destroyed with water damage throughout that section. Yet the Marco Polo remained seaworthy and continued toward Tilbury, but now with a somber reality settling over the voyage. By February 16th, passengers disembarked not in celebration, but in shock. Emergency services met the ship, and authorities launched investigations. The Bahamas Maritime Authority examined Captain Zhukov's weather awareness, the crew's response, and operational procedures. The investigation could not fully explain how a single wave generated such force, but this is the eternal mystery of rogue waves. They strike with disproportionate violence and remind mariners that the ocean answers to no human authority. The Marco Polo underwent repairs and returned to service in November 2014. She continued carrying passengers for 6 more years until Cruise and Maritime Voyages entered administration in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. The ship was eventually sold at auction, scrapped in India in 2021, ending a remarkable 56-year maritime career. But for Helen Swinstead and those aboard on February 14, 2014, the tragedy remains forever etched in memory. It proved a sobering truth. No amount of engineering, no careful captain, no reinforced hull can guarantee safety when the ocean decides to strike. The sea remains indifferent to human plans and dreams, and on that gray Atlantic afternoon, it took a man's life and shattered what was meant to be an unforgettable voyage for all the right reasons.